Welcome, the spicy lady. Some people escape addiction by fighting temptation. Others escape it because they see through the illusion before it traps them. Most people think addiction only means alcohol, drugs, or dangerous habits, but addiction is often much quieter than that. It can be attention, constant texting, emotional chaos, validation from strangers, the need to always feel wanted, the fear of sitting alone with your own thoughts. Many people are not addicted to substances. They are addicted to escape. This is where Spicy Lady Sigma confuses people. The average person assumes their self-control comes from discipline alone. But the truth is deeper than that. Spicy Lady Sigma usually develops a strong inner world long before anyone notices their independence. They learn how to sit with discomfort without immediately reaching for distractions. They observe people carefully. They notice how quickly some habits slowly turn into emotional prisons, and once they recognize manipulation or dependency, they mentally detach from it faster than most people expect. What makes this even more interesting is that many Spicy Lady Sigma have already experienced emotional disappointment early in life. Because of that, they become extremely careful about what they allow to control their mind, emotions, time, and peace. They value clarity more than temporary pleasure. This video is not about pretending Spicy Lady Sigma are perfect. They are human like everyone else, but there is a psychological reason many of them resist unhealthy attachments differently from others. Watch until the end because the deeper reasons are far more surprising than most people realize. Let's dive deeper. The Spicy Lady. Number 1. She studies her cravings instead of obeying them. One thing that separates a Spicy Lady Sigma from many people is not intelligence or toughness. It is awareness. She pays attention to herself in ways most people never do. Instead of automatically obeying every emotion, craving, or impulse, she quietly studies it first. That changes everything. Most people feel something and instantly react to it. They feel lonely, so they start texting people who drain them. They feel stressed, so they rush toward shopping, scrolling, overeating, or toxic distractions. They feel ignored, so suddenly they crave attention from people they do not even truly like. The emotion becomes the driver. The craving becomes the boss. But a Spicy Lady Sigma often pauses and asks herself a dangerous question. Why do I suddenly want this now? That single moment of self-observation protects her from many destructive habits. For example, she may notice that every time she feels emotionally overlooked, she suddenly wants to check her phone every few minutes, or every time life feels uncertain. She begins craving unhealthy comfort from people who only return when they need something from her. Instead of romanticizing the craving, she studies the pattern behind it. This is where many people misunderstand her. They think she is naturally cold or emotionally detached. In reality, she simply refuses to let temporary emotions control permanent decisions. She understands something painful that many people avoid admitting. Not every craving deserves to be fed. Some cravings are emotional alarms revealing deeper problems. A Spicy Lady Sigma slowly learns the difference between genuine desire and emotional escape. That awareness becomes powerful because addictions survive on unconscious behavior. Most unhealthy habits grow in darkness. They grow when people never question why they keep repeating the same cycles. But once someone becomes deeply aware of their emotional triggers, compulsive behavior starts losing its grip. And the truth is, this level of awareness usually comes from experience. Many Spicy Lady Sigma have spent years observing human behavior, disappointment, emotional inconsistency, and even their own mistakes. That observation sharpens their instincts. They become careful about what enters their mind because they understand how easily small habits can quietly become emotional cages. In the end, her greatest strength is not perfect self-control. It is the ability to recognize her emotions without becoming enslaved by them. Number 3. She values psychological control more than temporary pleasure. A Spicy Lady Sigma often values psychological control more than temporary pleasure. And most people completely misunderstand why. They assume she is simply disciplined or naturally resistant to temptation. But the truth usually runs much deeper than that. For her, losing control does not just feel unhealthy. It feels deeply unsettling. The idea of something controlling her emotions, habits, attention, or peace from the outside creates an internal discomfort that many people never think about. She does not like the feeling of needing something in order to feel stable. Whether it is a person, alcohol, constant attention, social media, or emotional chaos. The moment she notices something beginning to own her mentally, alarms start going off inside her mind. That is why she often pulls back before other people even realize they are trapped. For example, many people joke about not being able to stay away from their phones for 5 minutes. They laugh about checking messages every few seconds or scrolling for hours without realizing how exhausted they feel afterward. That a spicy lady Sigma may notice herself slipping into the same pattern once or twice. But instead of normalizing it, she becomes disturbed by how quickly a habit can start controlling her focus. She pays attention to small signs. Why am I reaching for this every time I feel uncomfortable? Why does silence suddenly feel difficult? Why do I feel anxious when I disconnect? Most people ignore these questions. She does not. And this mindset usually comes from experience. Many spicy lady Sigma have already seen what happens when people lose control of themselves emotionally. They have watched intelligent people become prisoners of toxic relationships. They have seen talented people destroy their peace-chasing temporary pleasure. They have seen people slowly hand over their confidence, dignity, and emotional stability to habits that started small. That observation leaves a mark on them. So, when a spicy lady Sigma protects her mind, it is not about acting superior. It is about self-preservation. She understands that once something gains control over your thoughts, it quietly begins shaping your decisions, emotions, and identity. And the frightening part is that most addictions do not arrive loudly. They enter gently, comfortably, sometimes even socially accepted. But a spicy lady Sigma notices the shift early because more than pleasure, she values clarity. More than excitement, she values peace. And more than temporary escape, she values ownership of her own mind. Number 4. She understands that dopamine is not happiness. One of the biggest psychological differences between a spicy lady Sigma and many people is that she eventually realizes something most of society never fully understands. Excitement is not the same thing as happiness. That realization changes the way she sees everything. Most people spend years chasing stimulation without noticing what it is doing to their mind. Constant entertainment, endless scrolling, fast relationships, attention from strangers, shopping for things they do not need. Loud environments that temporarily make them forget their stress. Every moment has to feel exciting, dramatic, or emotionally intense. And because society celebrates stimulation, people mistake it for fulfillment. But a spicy lady Sigma starts noticing something disturbing. Some of the most excited people she meets are also the emptiest. She notices people laughing loudly in public, but secretly feeling lost when they are alone. She sees people constantly surrounded by entertainment, yet unable to sit quietly with their own thoughts for 10 minutes. She watches people chase one emotional high after another, while their inner peace slowly disappears. That observation stays in her mind. For example, she may go out with friends and notice that everyone suddenly becomes uncomfortable the moment the music stops or the phones are put away. Nobody wants silence anymore. Nobody wants stillness. There always has to be noise, updates, stimulation, or distraction. And slowly, she realizes many people are not enjoying life. They are escaping themselves. That is when her mindset begins changing. Instead of asking, what feels good right now, she begins asking, what actually leaves me feeling peaceful afterward? That question is powerful because dopamine is temporary. It creates excitement, anticipation, and emotional spikes, but happiness is deeper. Happiness leaves stability behind, clarity, calmness, emotional balance. Dopamine often leaves exhaustion once the high disappears. That a spicy lady Sigma learns this through observation and experience. She notices how certain habits feel amazing in the moment, but quietly drain mental health later. She notices how some people become addicted to chaos because silence forces them to confront what they are avoiding internally. And this is why many spicy lady Sigma become resistant to unhealthy addictions, not because they never feel temptation, but because they understand the emotional trick behind it. They know stimulation can imitate fulfillment without ever truly becoming it, and once someone sees that difference clearly, many addictive patterns immediately lose their magic. Number 5. She is harder to emotionally blackmail. One of the most dangerous things about emotional dependency is that most people do not realize they are trapped until their peace is already controlled by someone else. That is why a spicy lady Sigma becomes difficult to manipulate psychologically. She is harder to emotionally blackmail because she has trained herself to survive without constantly depending on external comfort, and that changes the power dynamic completely. Many addictions are not really about pleasure. They are about attachment, the fear of losing someone, the fear of being alone, the fear of silence, the fear of rejection. Once fear enters the equation, people start tolerating things that slowly destroy them emotionally. A spicy lady Sigma notices this pattern early. She watches people stay in toxic relationships simply because they are afraid of starting over. She sees people constantly checking their phones, waiting for replies that determine their mood for the entire day. She notices how some people become emotionally addicted to attention, even when that attention comes from unhealthy people who disrespect them. And instead of romanticizing this behavior, she studies it carefully. For example, if someone only calls her when they need emotional support, but disappears when she needs the same energy back, she notices the imbalance quickly. While others may keep chasing that connection out of emotional attachment, she quietly distances herself, not because she lacks emotions, but because she understands how emotional dependency slowly turns into psychological imprisonment. This is what makes her difficult to control. People can only emotionally blackmail you when they become your emotional oxygen. Once your peace depends entirely on their presence, approval, attention, or affection, they gain invisible power over your decisions. They can manipulate your emotions simply by withdrawing affection, creating confusion, or making you fear abandonment. But a spicy lady Sigma develops emotional mobility. She can detach from environments that damage her peace. She can walk away from people who constantly drain her emotionally. She can disconnect from unhealthy attention sources before they become addictions. And that ability protects her mind more than most people realize. What makes this even deeper is that many spicy lady Sigma learned this lesson through painful experiences. At some point, they realize that emotional dependency can make intelligent people lose self-respect, boundaries, and clarity. Now, when something starts controlling their emotional stability too heavily, they pay attention immediately because to them, freedom is not just physical. It is emotional. And once a woman learns how to emotionally survive on her own, manipulation becomes far less effective against her mind. Number 6, most addictions are not about pleasure. They are about escape. Spicy lady Sigma tend to confront discomfort privately instead of sedating it publicly. One of the deepest things a spicy lady Sigma understands is that most addictions are not really about pleasure. They are about escape. People escape through different doors every day without even realizing it. Some escape through alcohol. Others escape through constant entertainment, toxic relationships, endless scrolling, overspending, or nonstop social activity. The method changes, but the reason underneath is often the same. They are trying to outrun discomfort. Silence feels heavy, so they keep noise around them constantly. Loneliness feels uncomfortable, so they stay connected to people who drain them emotionally. Stress builds up, so they distract themselves before they ever process what they are truly feeling. But a spicy lady Sigma tends to respond differently. Instead of immediately sedating discomfort publicly, she often confronts it privately. That does not mean she enjoys pain or never struggles emotionally. It means she understands something many people spend years avoiding. Escaping discomfort temporarily can create a much bigger prison later. When something hurts her emotionally, she usually retreats inward first. She thinks, observes, processes. She allows herself to sit with uncomfortable emotions long enough to understand where they are coming from instead of instantly covering them up with distractions. And that ability changes everything psychologically. For example, after a painful breakup, many people rush into another relationship immediately because they cannot tolerate emotional emptiness. Others spend hours online trying to feel desired again. Some drown themselves in distractions just to avoid silence. A spicy lady Sigma may disappear for a while instead. Not because she is unaffected, but because she understands healing cannot happen if every uncomfortable emotion is constantly numbed. She knows that avoidance can quietly become addiction. This is why people who can sit alone with their thoughts become difficult to manipulate. If silence does not scare you, emotional control becomes harder to use against you. That if loneliness does not immediately break you, unhealthy attachment loses much of its power. Most manipulation works by targeting emotional discomfort, fear of abandonment, fear of boredom, fear of isolation, fear of facing unresolved pain. But a spicy Lady Sigma slowly becomes familiar with her inner world. She learns how to survive her emotions without constantly needing external rescue. And once a person reaches that level of emotional endurance, they stop becoming easy prey for addictions, toxic environments, and psychological control, because the person who no longer needs escape becomes far harder to trap. Number 7. They know boredom is not an emergency. This is rare. Most addictions are born from the inability to sit still without stimulation. One reason Spicy Lady Sigma become resistant to many forms of addiction is because they understand something modern society has almost forgotten. Boredom is not an emergency. Most people today panic the moment life becomes quiet. The second there is no stimulation, they reach for something. A phone, music, notifications, conversations, food, entertainment, drama, anything to avoid sitting in stillness for too long. And at first it looks harmless, but over time, this constant need for stimulation slowly rewires the mind. People lose the ability to simply exist without distraction. Silence starts feeling uncomfortable. Waiting becomes unbearable. Even a few minutes alone with their own thoughts feels mentally heavy. A Spicy Lady Sigma notices this pattern very clearly. She notices how some people cannot eat a meal without scrolling through their phones. She sees how uncomfortable people become during quiet moments in conversations. She watches people switch endlessly between apps, videos, messages, and entertainment, not because they are happy, but because their minds have become addicted to constant stimulation. That awareness changes the way she responds to boredom. Instead of treating boredom like suffering, she treats it like information. She understands that boredom often reveals what people are avoiding internally. Restlessness, anxiety, emotional emptiness, lack of direction, unprocessed thoughts. Many addictions begin because people cannot tolerate stillness long enough to face what is happening inside them. For example, someone may feel emotionally unsettled for 5 minutes and instantly open social media for relief. Another person may jump from relationship to relationship because silence forces them to confront loneliness they never healed from. Others keep themselves permanently busy because slowing down would expose how exhausted or unhappy they truly are. A Spicy Lady Sigma becomes dangerous psychologically because she develops the ability to sit still without immediately needing escape. That is rare. She can spend time alone thinking deeply without feeling like something is wrong. She does not need constant emotional noise to feel alive. In fact, too much stimulation often starts draining her mentally instead of exciting her. And this ability protects her from many addictive patterns because addiction feeds on restless minds. It grows strongest in people who cannot tolerate discomfort, silence, boredom, or emotional stillness. But once someone becomes comfortable in quiet moments, they stop reacting impulsively to every craving that appears. That is why boredom no longer controls her. She learned that stillness is not emptiness. Sometimes it is clarity trying to speak. Number 8. She develops delayed gratification through observation, not motivation speeches. She does not usually build self-control from motivation talks or inspirational speeches. It develops in a quieter way, through observation, through watching life repeat the same patterns over and over until certain truths become impossible to ignore. One of those truths is simple but uncomfortable. Immediate pleasure often creates long-term weakness. Most people understand this in theory, but they do not feel it deeply enough for it to change their behavior. They know it, yet still repeat it. That is the difference. A Spicy Lady Sigma tends to learn it differently, not from lectures, but from experience and careful observation of people around her. She notices how quickly people want relief from discomfort. If something feels hard, they rush towards something easy. If something feels boring, they jump into stimulation. If something feels emotionally heavy, they escape into distraction. And at first, it seems harmless, but over time, she starts seeing the hidden cost. For example, someone may choose short-term comfort in relationships and ignore red flags just to avoid being alone. Months later, they are emotionally drained and more confused than before. Another person may choose constant entertainment instead of focus, only to realize they have no discipline left when real life demands effort. Someone else may choose emotional comfort, eating or spending, and slowly build stress they cannot escape from. She watches these patterns repeat in different forms with different people, but the outcome is always similar. Short-term relief becomes long-term dependence. That is where delayed gratification begins to form naturally in her mind. Not as a rule she forces herself to follow, but as a conclusion she cannot unsee. She starts asking different questions in real time. What will this decision feel like tomorrow, not just right now? What am I trading away for this moment of comfort? Is this solving anything or just postponing the consequences? Over time, this way of thinking becomes automatic. She does not need constant reminders or external pressure to stay disciplined. The observation itself becomes the teacher, and that is why delayed gratification becomes part of her personality. Not because she is trying to be superior or strict with herself, but because she has seen too clearly how often temporary pleasure creates future regret. Once someone sees that pattern enough times, it stops being advice. It becomes awareness they cannot easily ignore again. Number 9. She is less addicted to approval because she expects misunderstanding. She is less addicted to approval because she already expects misunderstanding. Most people quietly live with one hidden hope, that others will understand them, agree with them, and respond to them in a way that makes them feel seen. When that does not happen, it creates tension. They start adjusting themselves, explaining more, proving more, or changing their behavior just to reduce that discomfort. But a spicy Lady Sigma often learns something different over time. Understanding is not guaranteed. And once that expectation drops, something interesting happens inside the mind. The emotional pressure to constantly be accepted begins to weaken. She stops treating disagreement as a threat to her identity. She stops assuming silence means rejection. She stops interpreting every opinion as a judgment of her worth. For example, she may share an idea in a group and notice that people do not fully get it. Instead of over-explaining herself to force agreement, she simply lets it sit. She understands that not every mind is wired to interpret things the same way. Some people will misread her intentions. Some will disagree without really thinking deeply about it. Some will project their own emotions onto her behavior, and she is okay with that. This is where emotional stability quietly grows. Once a person stops needing universal validation, the nervous system becomes less reactive. There is no longer a constant internal alarm every time someone misunderstands them. Criticism no longer lands as a personal attack on identity. It becomes data, sometimes useful, sometimes irrelevant, but no longer controlling. For instance, if someone misunderstands her choices or questions her decisions, she does not feel the need to immediately defend her entire character. She evaluates whether the feedback has value. If it does, she reflects. If it does not, she lets it pass without internal disturbance. That shift removes a huge emotional burden because a large part of anxiety in modern life does not come from what people say. It comes from the need to be perfectly understood by everyone at all times. Once that need weakens, mental space opens up, thoughts become clearer, decisions become calmer, reactions become slower and more intentional, and slowly something important develops. She no longer measures herself by how well she is understood. She measures herself by how clearly she understands her own direction. Number 10. Her real immunity comes from accepting one brutal truth. Most things people get addicted to are not really about the thing itself. They are substitutes, quick replacements for something deeper that feels missing inside. It might be emotional comfort. It might be clarity. It might be connection. It might be self-worth. Or sometimes just the ability to feel at peace without noise. And when that inner gap is not addressed, people naturally start reaching for anything that temporarily fills it. Scrolling, relationships, substances, attention, shopping, constant stimulation. Not because those things are powerful, but because the emptiness underneath is uncomfortable enough to avoid. A spicy Lady Sigma often becomes aware of this pattern through observation and experience. She starts noticing that excitement does not always mean fulfillment, that being constantly busy does not mean being emotionally full. that external stimulation can cover internal emptiness without actually healing it. And here is where her mindset shifts. Instead of running from that emptiness, she becomes willing to sit with it. For example, when silence feels heavy or when life slows down and there is nothing distracting her, she does not immediately escape into noise or distraction. She allows the discomfort to exist long enough to understand it. Sometimes that means facing loneliness. Sometimes it means confronting thoughts she has avoided. Sometimes it simply means sitting in stillness without trying to fix it instantly. Most addictions lose power in people who stop fearing that inner space because addiction depends on avoidance. It grows stronger when a person cannot tolerate being with themselves. But when someone becomes familiar with their own silence, the urgency to escape weakens. The craving still appears, but it no longer feels like an emergency. That is the quiet foundation of her psychological strength, not perfection, not emotional numbness, not constant control, but familiarity with her own inner world, even the parts others rush to escape. And once a person can face their own emptiness without panic, very few external things can fully control them anymore. Final words freedom becomes powerful the moment a person realizes they do not need constant escape to survive their own mind. At the end of the day, the real reason many spicy Lady Sigma become resistant to addiction has very little to do with perfect discipline. It comes from awareness. They slowly recognize that many addictive behaviors are not actually about enjoyment. They are emotional survival mechanisms, quick ways people avoid discomfort, loneliness, stress, boredom, rejection, or emptiness. And once that truth becomes clear, their entire perspective changes. A spicy Lady Sigma usually begins noticing how easily temporary comfort can become psychological dependency. Point 1, distraction turns into a routine. Point 1, emotional escape becomes a habit. One habit slowly starts controlling emotions, focus, peace, and even identity. While many people normalize these cycles, she quietly studies them. She notices how exhausted people become from constantly chasing stimulation. She notices how some people cannot sit in silence without reaching for a screen, a conversation, or some form of emotional noise. She notices how quickly unhealthy attachments form when people are terrified of being alone with themselves. That observation makes her more careful about what she allows to control her mind. This does not mean spicy Lady Sigma never struggle. They are human. They feel pain, temptation, loneliness, and emotional pressure like everyone else. But many of them learn how to face discomfort directly instead of immediately escaping from it. And that ability changes everything psychologically, because addiction grows strongest in people who fear stillness. But when a person becomes comfortable sitting with their own thoughts, understanding their emotions, and facing reality without constant distraction, many addictive patterns lose their grip naturally. In the end, their greatest strength is not emotional perfection. It is inner clarity. And once someone values inner freedom more than temporary relief, manipulation, dependency, and addiction stop having the same power over them anymore. Thank you for watching, and God bless you. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Nail polish, I'll see you in the next one.